Today I have another interview for you with someone who knew Hitler very well. In the 1967 film The Producers, that is the satirical musical with the song Springtime for Hitler, Mel Brooks wrote of a theatre producer who has a scam designed to produce a theatrical production which will be so bad that it will close on its first night, and he can keep the production money for himself, which he has oversold many times over. He raises the money for the production by sleeping with old ladies. Mel Brooks said that he based this character on someone he knew who would sleep with old ladies in order to raise the capital to do just that. Now, have you ever wondered if the real Adolf Hitler did that? No, of course not. That would be too ridiculous. The interview I'm presenting here was between the American historian John Toland, who wrote a biography of Hitler amongst many other works, and Bruno Gesche. Now, before going into the interview, I'd like to give you a bit of background material to put all this in context. Bruno Gesche was born on the 5th of November 1905 in Berlin. He joined the Nazi Party aged only 16 in 1922, so he was very much in at the very beginning. He probably wanted to join the army, but this was a career path closed to him by the restricted sides of the German military imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Shortly afterwards, he joined the newly formed Sturmabteilung, SA, which initially was not a good career move for him, as he lost his job at the bank where he was working when his employers found out about it. However, long term, it did help his SS career. After the beer hall putsch on the 9th of November 1923, the Nazi Party was banned. When it was re-established in 1925, Gesche rejoined it. Membership number was 8592. He also became a member of the SA again, leaving after the 1927 Nazi Party Congress to join the Schutzstaffel, the SS, membership number 1093. Being an early member, problems with his eyesight were overlooked, which would not have been had he joined later. Being an early member, Hitler and Gensche knew each other personally, so they went back to way back. The SS was supposed to be Hitler's bodyguard. The word SS means Schutzstaffel, that is, protection squad. However, it became a parallel organization of the SA, only more elite. For example, I've seen the words SS translated as elite guard, and that is probably more of a translation for it. A better translation. On the 29th of February 1932, Himmler suggested to Hitler that he needed permanent bodyguards. Hitler had Sepp Dietrich draw up a short list of 12, and Gesche was one of the 8 SS men that Hitler selected for his closest bodyguard, which was called the Führerbegleitkommando. That is to say, the unit which accompanies the Führer, which I'm going to term the escort unit. Now, it's strange because then Gesche and Himmler seem to have got on quite well, but that wasn't to be always the case, as we shall see. In June 1934, Gesche was promoted to the post of commander of the escort unit, and that's a role he held almost continually until December 1944, although there was an interruption of 6 months or so in 1942. Now, I mentioned that he got on well with Himmler, or they seemed to didn't have any problems, until 1932, and then they were really at each other's throats. Now, normally that would not be a good idea in the Third Reich, but as Hitler liked Gesche, he didn't get himself into too serious trouble. Well, not immediately. The first clash came during the election campaign on the 14th of October 1932. On that day, Hitler was in Zelb, a town around 2 kilometers from the Czech border, around 10 kilometers southeast of Hof. Gesche was very vocal about the security measures in place, and he didn't approve of them at all. Himmler took this as a personal attack on him. He wanted Gesche to be kicked out of the Führerbegleitkommando, but Hitler settled for giving him a telling off. On the 15th of October 1937, Gesche married Anna Louise Ries. The date of the wedding was her 28th birthday, and the marriage resulted in 2 daughters. Gesche liked the bottle. He had quite serious alcohol problems, and on the 28th of September 1938, Himmler forced him to give a written assurance that he wouldn't drink anymore. If not, he would be kicked out of the SS. However, because of the relationship with Hitler, the very same abstinent Hitler who was against drinking alcohol, he sort of said, "Oh, don't worry about it, we'll sort this one out." In the spring of 1942, in a drunken rage, Gesche threatened another SS officer with a weapon. This is, of course, a very serious offence which should have led to a court-martial, and it would lead to a court-martial in any army. Presumably, Hitler was unable to intervene. When Himmler found out, he had him transferred from the escort unit to the Eastern Front. He was posted to the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking, which was then in southern Russia. In October 1942, he was wounded and had to be transferred home. It is worth pointing out, of course, that by then, Gesche was 36 years old, 37 by the time he got back, and he had no military experience whatsoever and had never done an army officer's course. But nonetheless, he seems to have acquitted himself very well. When Hitler found out that he was back in Germany, he requested that he return to the escort unit, where he was reappointed commander. In December 1944, there was another alcohol-related incident that was so serious that Gesche was demoted by 11 ranks from SS Obersturmbannführer, which is approximately equivalent to that of a lieutenant colonel, to SS Unterscharführer, approximately equivalent to that of corporal. Himmler also had him report to the Dirlewanger Brigade, which is an SS punishment unit where Himmler had sent other SS leaders who had displeased him. Now, earlier that year in Warsaw, fighting against ill-armed and to a certain extent disorganized Polish partisans, the brigade had suffered a casualty rate of 315%. This, I think, is more due to its total ineptitude as a military unit, being made up more of criminals than soldiers. But all the same, it's a very high casualty rate. At the beginning of 1944, the unit was on the Oder front. Once more, Hitler intervened, and understandably so, because he didn't want any members of his bodyguard being captured by the Soviets on the Eastern Front, and possibly then talking about his secrets. So, alternatively, he was just trying to save a friend. Anyway, so he was sent to the Italian front, where he joined the 16th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. At the end of the war, Gesche was taken prisoner by the Americans. The author, John Toland, made numerous attempts to interview him. After many years, Gesche agreed, but on condition that he was asked nothing about Himmler, Bormann, the Night of the Long Knives, or anything to do with his military service. He was only prepared to talk about Hitler as a private man, and such as what he had to say is very illuminating. I suspect he didn't want to talk about the other things because he may have been involved in crimes. So I'm going to speak in 2 voices as much as I can, and so you'll follow the interview style of the presentation. So John kicks it off with a question. Let's talk about Hitler in the 1920s. What was he like? What kinds of things did he like to do, for example? Gesche responds, "The boss liked music and art. I never cared about these things, so we didn't talk about it. But what he and I liked were engines, car engines. He knew about everything to do with cars, engines, performance. He was a car nut like me, so we talked about that mostly. Did you drive with him in his car? Oh no, hardly ever. The main car had a driver, Hitler, sat in the passenger seat, and Schaub and another adjutant to the rear. Bruckner was there, and Sepp Dietrich was a regular too. Hoffmann, me, a few others, we all were in the second vehicle. That was better for security. Security was the issue in the period of struggle before the Nazis came to power. Communists were always threatening us, issuing death threats to Hitler. So it wasn't all sunshine and roses. We were always prepared. When you travelled, did you stay at the same hotel as Hitler? I did. The entire staff did. We always had the party hotel reserved in all the big cities. Plus, the boss stayed loyal to all these places after 1933. But who paid for the hotel bills? They must have been enormous. Well, it was understood that one or another of Hitler's motherly friends, let's call them, picked up the tab. Hitler had some old women in Munich who supported him and gave him lavish presents. One of them bought Hitler's first supercharger. He had some rich friends, and these ladies were generous with him. They were all loaded and more than glad to pass on their money to Hitler. You're saying someone like Frau Bechstein of the piano family would have paid for Hitler's hotel tabs in those days? I'm not saying that she personally paid for them. I mean, these old ladies passed a lot of cash to Hitler when he visited them. How much, I don't know, but it was a lot. Hitler had no income except for Mein Kampf, and that wasn't selling very well until he became Chancellor. Nobody bought it, nobody read it. Were these older women fond of Hitler? They must have been. Fond? No, they were in love with him. And they didn't look upon him as a son. They were all nuts over the boss, and he wasn't stupid enough to turn his back on serious money. It was meant for him personally, not the party. These women didn't give a damn about the party. It was Hitler they were after. None of them were National Socialists, even if they were members of the party. How was Hitler behaving towards these older women? Oh, the boss was charming. I don't care what's said now. I knew him and I saw the charm. He was even charming with men, but with women he poured it on thick like glue, real thick. And these old ladies, rich old ladies, ate all that up like a cow herd coming to a salt lick. I got so sick of seeing this I would just leave when he visited these women. Why? What was it that annoyed you? The way the boss would bow down to these old women and carry on with them just for the moment when they'd hand over cars, apartments, furniture, paintings, envelopes full of money. I didn't like a man behaving in that way in front of a bunch of old hens. Well, the thought of a Hitler as a gigolo was a hard one for me to grasp. I don't think he slept with them all, except maybe Frau Bechstein. I think that she was around 13 years older. She wasn't doddering and her husband was away a lot. Just check the records of Landsberg. She visited Hitler all the time. Before then, I personally know he spent a lot of time alone with her in the house. I waited outside for him. He was doing more than just begging for money. You believe that Hitler actually had a sexual relationship with Frau Bechstein? Hey, you ask me and I'll give you an answer. She was in love with him and was just loaded. Have you ever seen how much a Bechstein piano costs? They cost a fortune. If Hitler had to service her once in a while to keep the cash flowing, why not? He wasn't above that in the early times. Oh, that's an interesting piece of information. How much time did you spend around Hitler before he went to prison? Oh, not as much as later, but I joined the party in 1922 and knew him right after that. We'd get into fights in beer halls where the mugs would go crashing. I'll give the boss credit though. He had his presence. He was no shrinking violet in the early days. He gave as good as he got. He wasn't tall, but he was wiry and he was strong. He kept his nerve in the brawls. Did you like him? That isn't it, you see. Like him? Yes, but he was my leader, my boss. He was the light for the future. I make no apologies then or now and never will. I revered him. I would have given my life for him in a moment. Everyone around him felt the same. He inspired devotion. As a man, we had little in common, but I admired his intelligence, strength of character, and of course the way he spoke. No public speaker who ever lived could better him. He was spellbinding. He was like a messiah. You mentioned older women and Hitler. Were you aware of other relationships with women? Sure. He wasn't how propaganda portrayed him. That was all throwing a shadow over the truth. He was like every other man, but a lot more careful, and he never talked about his relationships. But he wouldn't tell us to shut up if we bragged like roosters, and we did. He'd listen with a quiet smile. He never contributed to the stories. His mouth was clamped shut. If he had a girlfriend, we'd all know about it, but he would never share anything about it with us. John asks, some of the other Hitler intimates I've interviewed mention the name of Maria Reiter. Aha, yes, we all called her Mimi. I don't think anyone ever called her Maria. Hitler never did. I don't know a lot about that relationship, except that she was beautiful. She was a real looker. Hitler's taste in women was usually very good. If he found a girl pretty, I would almost always agree. Did you know Maria Reiter? I wouldn't say I knew her. I spoke to her a few times. I saw her in Munich with Hitler in a few places. He'd take her to out-of-the-way places, not his usual haunts, but he never spoke about her except in later years. If we were at a hotel or an inn or something and a beauty walked by, Hitler would say, "Oh, she looks like my Mimi." Or he'd call her Mitzel in his Austrian way. Oh God, she was a beauty. I never saw her again after the boss got control of things, after he was Führer. But even in the late 30s, he would call her my Mimi, even though I doubt he'd seen her in years by that time. What can you tell me about Geli Rabaul, the much-loved niece? Did you know her? Sure, she was always around Hitler for several years before she killed herself. He even let her travel with us when we were on the road, though not in the main colonnade. Did her mother accompany her? Are you kidding? No, she once went to Bayreuth and once up north, but she wasn't a pleasant lady. I don't think Geli was that fond of her either. She was grouchy. I don't know why the boss had her around for so long as he did, even if they were related. As for Geli, she was not blonde like books say now. It's so ridiculous. She had very dark hair, almost black. She was not the ideal Aryan type that Hitler usually ran after. Did she return Hitler's twisted affection? Now, would you use that word to describe her? Because she was related to him. She was the daughter of his half-sister. Well, I don't know. That wasn't a problem for him or for us. The communist papers went after that aspect, but nobody then cared a damn about it. Geli was around all the time, so what if they were related? She was in love with Emil Maurice, the driver of Hitler then, but he refused to discuss that with me when I interviewed him. Geli was a manic depressive, through and through, up and down. Hitler had that tendency too, but Geli didn't have his explosive temper. She would just sit there and stew. But she wanted what she wanted, and she was spoilt rotten by the boss. She and Maurice were close. How close, I don't know. I knew him well. He had the tendency to exaggerate his affairs. He had plenty, but whether or not he had Geli, I don't know. Was Geli in love with Hitler? Or was it unreciprocated? I don't know where that story arose from either. Just more rubbish from the people who weren't alive then. It's all in the books now and it's all lies. Whatever went on between them was reciprocal. This newspaper rubbish that Hitler forced himself on her is just not true. She happily accompanied him everywhere. It wasn't just because he had money either. He was a big thing then, bigger than anything else going on her. Ernst Hafenstein told me that he thought Geli was oppressed by Hitler and didn't return his love. I couldn't care less what he says. He has no business talking about anything. He cheated on his wife all the time and was a nasty type of man. Hitler was furious that he was cheating on his wife because he adored her. He really liked that woman. She was a woman he would gladly have taken to bed, but she turned him down. What are your memories, if any, about Hitler after Gerli killed herself? The inner circle all says he was never the same. Well, I don't know about that. He was a grown man when she did herself in. He was over 40. He'd been through the war, the inflation, our country raped and degraded. He loved Gerli, but he'd been through death many times before. He was very, very distraught for a while, but he had things to do, business, and nothing was going to stand in his way. What do you mean by he had business? That he was striving to take over our country, which happened about a year and a half after her death. Her death was a speed bump on the road, but it didn't do him in. He continued living after a period of grief. He told me towards the end of that year, 1931, that he didn't want to live without Gerli, but he had to save Germany. That Providence wanted her to die for some reason, and he had to figure it out. I don't think he ever figured that one out. After Gerli died, Hitler takes up with Eva Braun. What can you tell me about that? He knew Eva Braun long before Gerli died, I can tell you that. He was very friendly with her for a couple of years. He didn't see that much of her, but when we were in Munich, he sought her out. Eva was completely the opposite to Gerli in character, looks, temperament, practically everything. All of us noticed that and made remarks about it. They were completely two different creatures. Oh, explain the differences. I don't know if I can. Maybe you would have to have been around both women as I was to have seen what was going on. Gerli was highly strung, temperamental. She could be demanding, have fits, just damn spoiled. She put herself ahead of the boss in some things, in many things in fact. Eva Braun would never have done that. Hitler was always first. Eva was devoted and put her needs and dreams in a secondary spot. Her world was him. That's about how I'd put it. It sounds as though you liked Eva Braun more than Gerli. Oh yes, certainly, I'll say I did. I spent more time with Gerli than with Eva. I knew Gerli better, but Eva was much better for Hitler. She was the perfect woman for a man, away all the time and devoted solely to his nation. She tolerated his whims, his personality, which could be very, very difficult. She played one hell of a hand in gaining his affection and devotion. She may not have been brainy, but she was clever. Do you know what I mean? Do you recall when you first met Eva? What year was that? I'm a bit forgetful about dates. I remember seeing at Hoffman's place, his atelier in Munich. She was pretty, I noticed her, I can tell you that. Hitler met her in October 1929. Yes, that sounds about right. I do know that Gerli died in the summer of 1931. Some big dates like that stick in my brain. Hitler noticed Eva early on. He'd like to drop in and see her. He called her mein Schatzel, that's my little treasure, which indicated that he was attracted. He liked what he saw. Who wouldn't? All of us liked looking at her. She had two legs, which I really liked looking at. Her legs were dynamite. Even an old man has his memories. But Hitler was living with Gerli in Munich then. Sure, so he was just friends with Eva because of that. Gerli would have raised hell, no doubt about it. The boss still took Eva out now and again when Gerli was absent from Munich. Gerli was gone sometimes in Austria at the time. He took her to the opera, for instance. Hafenstengel mentions this. That, as well as lunch, picnics and those type of things. I never once sat through an opera with the boss. I always sat outside in the colonnade or killed time for the hours that went by. But Eva went to the theatre with him. He liked her. But it wasn't any great passion then. Eva was a looker and she was clever in nabbing him. Do you know the details of that? No, I just know that after Gerli died, Eva entrenched herself into his life, at least in Munich. I never saw her in Berlin until long years later, and she ran the Berghof, or at least I thought so. Everyone with whom I have talked always confirms Eva Braun truly loved him. Add me to that list, because that's the truth. That's just all there is to it. That woman loved him from the first to the last. I think Hitler was extremely fond of her and devoted to her. Love? I don't know. Maybe later. At first she was just his girl in Munich. He was still quite the man with women anyway from Munich until 1933. Then Eva was the only one. Did you ever have private chats with Eva Braun? Sure, especially on the mountain. She lived up there more or less openly with the boss after Gehle's death. Nobody in Germany knew about her, but all of us knew. He didn't try to hide her from us. She was there, we accepted it, and Hitler was entitled to a private life. He deserved it. Eva was nice, no arrogance, despite her position. Did Hitler ever talk about Eva to you? Early on, sure. I already said that he called her his Schatzl when we dropped in on her at Hoffman's. When we were together in front of other people, for example, they acted just like friends. I never saw them hug, for instance. I can't imagine Hitler doing that in front of others. He was very shy in showing affection like that. Even with Gehle, that was behind closed door stuff. He was private, really, really private. Do you think Eva was happy with Hitler? When she was with him, sure she was. He provided for her well. She lacked for nothing as the years went by. But most of all, she just wanted to be by his side. She must have been lonely because he was away all the time. Kempke told me that she was the loneliest woman in Germany. She saw Hitler often enough, though maybe not in the war years. He spent a lot of time away from Berlin and he was with her then. Little Eva had to accept that he was not an ordinary man. She knew this. She had an enviable life to most women. We must recognise that. He was the big prize and she had him. You don't think there is some consolation and he married her? That says plenty right there, doesn't it? Did Hitler still see other women after he took it with Eva Braun? He saw women all the time. He still heavily flirted, that was just him. He went nuts over a couple of girls in Berlin and would take it right up the line then back down. Hitler loved women, loved pretty girls and loved talking about women. I seriously doubt he ever stepped out on Eva. You have to remember that Hitler's big phrase was, women can't keep their mouths shut. So he was right. Plenty of women like Riefenstahl, that British girl Mitford, crowed that they had taken Hitler to bed. I know nothing like that happened with either of them. Or Frau Goebbels, who would have paid a king's ransom to be with the boss. That's a common refrain I hear from the old group. Was there a romance between them, either before or after her marriage to Dr. Goebbels? After they got married? No, Hitler wouldn't have taken that risk, even if he was attracted to that lady. And he was. I wasn't. This was one of the few times, also with Gehle, where he lost his heart to a woman I didn't find pretty. But from the photos, Magda Goebbels was quite beautiful. Not to me. She was ambitious and calculating. What more can be said except she married a man she didn't love just to get close and stay close to the boss. She never loved Goebbels, though I heard from Dietrich that she really did love her first husband. The boss liked her a lot. He talked about her a lot and sought her out, but she wasn't his type. He wouldn't have had a long-term relationship with a married woman or a divorced woman. In the early days, sure, but by the time Frau Goebbels showed up, those adventures were something of the past as far as he was concerned. Wasn't Magda Goebbels jealous of Eva Braun? I assume so, sure, yes. They weren't together much until many years later. Hitler kept them apart, just as Emmy Goering was kept away. I don't think she ever laid eyes on Eva Braun. The boss chose right with Eva. She was younger, prettier and more modern than Frau Goebbels. Frau Goebbels was smart though. I remember she could speak French and had a large library. Her apartment in Berlin was quite something. So the interview ends there, and I hope that you found that interesting. So I'm going to add a couple of personal observations and we'll finish off the CV. So in the film, the Hitler, The Rise of Evil, which I know has had mixed reviews, I personally don't think it's a good film, but you have to bear in mind a large part of it is fiction, and that maybe I think it's a good film because of the brilliant role played by Robert Carlyle, and had it been a lesser actor than him, then maybe it would have completely changed the film. Anyway, as I said, a lot of it's fiction, or shall we say it takes a lot of liberties with facts. John Keegan, the historian, Hitler biographer, was an advisor, but he walked off and forbade them to use his name. One incident stands out that I assumed was an invention in the film is when Hitler makes advances towards Helene Hafenstein, which seemed to me to be totally out of character for Hitler. But now we have a source, or we've had a source now for many years, that this probably did actually happen. Now, another thing as well is this, that when Hitler was in Landsberg prison, he wrote to a car salesperson in Munich to reserve a vehicle for him. He was at the time pretty poor and he certainly had no prospects. The party had been banned and he was ordering a very expensive vehicle. This is literally like you or I ordering a brand new Bugatti or something like that. Where did he think he'd get the money from? How would he pay for it? Well, this interview has answered both of those questions. Now, after speaking to John Toland, Gensche also spoke to Peter Hoffmann, who has written a number of books. He's best known for his books on the German resistance, including a biography on Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg, and he also wrote about Hitler's private protection. I'm not aware of anyone else that Gensche spoke to. Bruno Gesche died in Berlin in 1980, aged 74. Thanks very much for listening to me. It's one of the longest videos I have done. And on this site anyway, it's not in general, it isn't, but on this site. And I upload every Friday at 8 in the evening, my time in Central Europe. That is 7 in the evening in the UK, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles. That happens on a Friday, and sometimes I upload videos at other times too. And I'll just tell you as well how this video came about, because somebody called Bruno Gesche wrote to me and said to me, how about doing a video on him? And I said, well, look, I've already got it prepared. Why don't I upload it? So that's how the video came about. So Bruno, this is in part your work. Thanks for listening.